Welcome to episode 7 of Unexceptional Moms podcast. My name is Ellen Stumble from ellenstumble.com
and I'm Erin Lorraine. Today we are doing a topic that came as a request from a listener. Amy asked us to talk a little bit about how to respond when people use words that are rude. So Ellen and I have been discussing this pretty extensively before starting this. And I think we want to start by just giving examples of what that's looked like for us and for some people we know. Because sometimes it's hard for people to really understand, especially if they don't live with someone with a disability or have a disability.
Right, it is.
So Ellen, give me an example.
Well, there's several, but I think about, for example, when we adopted, and Erin, you and I were talking about this, when we announced that we were adopting a little girl with cerebral palsy, we had someone from our church come and ask us, well, couldn't you find one that was healthy? Because we already had Nicole who has Down syndrome, so they could not imagine or understand why we would purposefully adopt a child with a disability. And it was a little bit like, oh.
Yeah, right. So our adoption one was our second adoption. I had someone ask me, are you going to adopt a normal one this time? Which, I'm of the belief that no one in my family is normal. So
yeah. I can attest to that. It's true.
Yeah, yes. It does just kind of make you go, wow, is that really what you just asked me?
Mm-hmm.
My other adoption related one is she yours, which has nothing to do with disability, but it's something that really irks people in the adoption community. Of course, she's mine. They're asking if she's biological or not.
Right.
So you have other examples? Give me another example.
I do. Because Nicole has Down syndrome, I am often asked, did you know before she was born? And to me, the implication of that question, it says a lot. Like, if you didn't know, why would you choose to have her? Or you probably didn't know. That's why you had her. And that, to me, is a rude thing to ask someone if you don't know them very well.
Right. Another one I get is, I would never give my child XYZ medication, or did you know that my sister's brother's uncle cured his disability using this supplement?
Yes.
I had a woman approach me once and tell me about a supplement with pictures and everything. Picture of a child 4 and a picture of child after. The child had Down syndrome. The before picture, the facial features were very prominent. The after picture, they were not. And she was toting this supplement as something I could use to essentially cure her Down syndrome.
Oh, wow.
I find that offensive, A. The other thing I find offensive is, do you think that if it was as simple, I'm going to use the mental illness as an example here. Do you think if it was as simple as putting her on a gluten-free diet, that I wouldn't have considered that by now and she would be cured?
Right. Right.
And so Oxana does require a lot of heavy-duty psychiatric medications to function in the world. Whether you agree with that or not, I'm sorry, but you're not the parent. So.
And I understand that people, want the best sometimes when they're sharing some of those comments or sharing some of the advice that is unsolicited advice that comes across very rude. And that's something that I say often. If you heard it from your uncle's friend or whoever you heard it from, do you not think that I've heard about that before? And if it is at all possible that it could work, do you really not think that we've tried it?
Right. And I think the approach is different too. So there's I have a cure for what your child has. And there's I've heard this is successful. Have you heard about this? Have you considered this? There's just different approaches there.
Mm-hmm.
That I think, I have a friend who actually recommended something to me and she was like, okay, before we start, I want to say that I'm not trying to say this is going to cure her. No, it's fine. Just tell me, because there are things to learn about.
Mm-hmm.
How it's handled.
Yes. And the other rude comments that we deal with, um, specific about my kids and around my kids, one is not a comment, but it's the staring that you see adults staring, you see people staring, and it's just rude. And I know with Nicole, I have gotten to the point that when people stare, trying to diffuse the situation, I usually make a comment like, she is really beautiful, isn't she? And I feel like for most people, it kind of gives them permission to look at her,
Yeah.
but then to look at her in a positive way. However, on the other hand, sometimes people are staring and it's not happy and it's not someone that you're going to engage in conversation and it is rude. And I know of people that respond and say, what are you looking at? I'm not a person that would ever say that.
Right. And we'll dig into that a little more.
We will. And the other thing that I hear, and it's sitting in front of my kids, and it has been kids or adults that they say, what's wrong with her?
What's wrong with her? Mm-hmm. Yep, we've had that.
And we're going to talk about how I've started responding to when people say that with my daughter who has cerebral palsy.
I think the last one that I think I want to point out that we've faced is, oh, that's so sad.
Yes, we've gotten that too.
It's really not. It's really not. It's okay. No.
Yes, you know.
I told one man once, this child was plucked out of an orphanage in the middle of Ukraine, and she is living the high life. There is nothing to be sad about. Nothing.
And, you know, those comments for me usually come from people that I just meet. When you're getting to know them and they ask about your family and they figure, you know, they find out that I have 3 girls and 2 of my girls have a disability. Oh, I'm really sorry. Like,
nothing to be sorry about.
Do I look like I live a sorry life? Right. Like, what are you reading in me that makes you think that our life is so miserable and tragic?
And I think the examples we're giving are mildly rude. There are people who have faced questions that are blatantly rude.
Yes.
I have not come across that so much.
Right. I mean, we both have friends. So we know of people who have even online stolen their child's picture and written horrible memes about them, making fun of their child with a disability.
Right.
Or to their face said very rude and horrible things. I mean, even to the point of saying your child is a punishment from God.
Yes.
Or your child is a result of your sin.
Mm-hmm.
If you knew...
Did you do something to cause that?
Yes. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You probably did something to cause that. So it is. Some of the comments, some of them are mild, and some of them are so rude that I think afterwards we come up with great things that we could say. But at the moment when they happen, it's so shocking. And we end up in such a vulnerable place that we just don't have the words or probably even the emotional strength, perhaps, to respond to those comments at the time. But then later we go home and we're like, you know, so angry, or we think through it and we say, oh, I wish I would have said this. Which maybe it's better that we didn't.
Yeah, right?
Maybe next time we can.
Really, there's a couple of ways that you can respond to these. And one is with grace and education, and one is with confrontation. And I think for me, the bottom line is looking at intent. So when someone says something rude to me, my brain is immediately evaluating, who are you? What is your intent? Because I'm not going to be rude if you're just asking me something in the wrong way and it's coming across as kind of rude. So for example, the person said, are you going to adopt a normal one this time? That happened to be a very good friend of mine. And I know she was just asking, are you going to adopt a child with special needs the next time? And so my response was, we're adopting a child with special needs again. That was my response. And we moved on. So I think looking at the intent, most people are not asking rude questions to be mean and would actually be horrified if they knew that what they said offended you.
Yes.
Not everyone. So you have to kind of evaluate the situation and decide how you're going to respond.
And if you are going to choose to be greatly offended or to allow that to be a situation where you let go. And I think when I look at the intent, I try to remember who I used to be before I was a special needs mom.
Yes.
And I try to remember where I was at in my understanding of disability and where I was at in my attitudes towards disability. And quite frankly, I was very ignorant and I had a lot of pity. So most of what I experienced kind of got filtered through that because I didn't know very much. So we had friends that had kids with disabilities, and I wonder how many times I said something that was just really plain hurtful and stupid. And thankfully, they didn't bring that up or they didn't count that against me. So I try to extend that same grace to other people.
Because even outside of the disability discussion, we all say stupid things. We all do without ill intent. We ask the wrong way or we say things that are rude. And I want to extend to other people the same grace that I would like them to extend to me.
Now, if the intent is malicious,
that's different.
That's very different. Absolutely.
It is very different.
Now, I don't know about you, but I have certain situations where I have created a certain script in my mind.
Sure.
So that I know if somebody says that, this is how I respond. And sometimes I even have those scripts, for example, when something is said with good intent. Like I often hear it, wow, you must really have your hands full. And it's said in a way of, that I could never do it. So when I get this specific, you must have your hands full, I always say, I do. They're full of love. And that usually kind of just makes a light situation not become anything like, why did they say it again?
And I think the classic example of a lot of these is large families. Large families get a lot of rude comments and they have a lot of comebacks.
Yes.
The best one I ever heard, it's really not appropriate for this podcast, but really it's one of those comments that it would make the situation hilarious, but let the person know, that was kind of inappropriate.
Yeah.
And
I think it's okay to come up with those.
Absolutely. And our goal here is to unify. When we confront people rudely, if their intent is good, if we lash out at them, they will stop asking questions and they will avoid people with disabilities. I want people asking questions and I want to help them be more educated about disability. And if we're rude to them, that's doing the exact opposite. Again, we're talking about people with intent to learn and kindness and not rudeness. Yeah.
And I would say most people close to us, our so-called friends, are going to not necessarily be in the rude intent, place. Now, family is completely different, and we're not going to talk about family. We've decided we're not talking about family. But
I do have a great intent story. I have a friend who has a child with Down syndrome, and she was shopping one day, and an elderly woman approached her and was genuinely thought her children were beautiful. I mean, just really, you could tell, but she called them mongoloids. And at first, my friend was really taken aback. And then she realized this is what they called people with Down syndrome in her era. And she doesn't have a better word for it. Her intent is that she wants to tell me how beautiful my children are. So this is not the time for me to confront her or be rude to her about her use of the word mongoloid.
Which reminds me of a story of a friend that I had where the intent was an ill intent, where someone approached with her daughter and she said, and she used the R word, and she said, is your child retarded? And my friend, I don't know if you are connected with her on Facebook or not, but she turned around and she responded, no, but you are for asking. And I've always said, oh, I give you kudos, because I would have never said that to anybody. She said what we all think in our minds we would like to say. And I think she would agree it was not the best response. but it was such a hurtful thing. And her daughter is right there. Her daughter is listening to those words.
So let's talk
I
a
am
little
not
bit about.
advocating, let's just say I am not advocating for anybody ever saying that, because that is just as rude to say back.
So let's talk a little bit, let's break up into groups here. So let's talk about when kids say rude things, when adults say rude things, and when you as a parent have a child who says rude things, how you should respond. So let's talk about in those a little bit about how we would use education to answer those. And then at the end, let's discuss a little bit of when people are being rude, what is a response that you can use if you don't want to be completely confrontational, but you want it to be clear that the conversation is over. So let's start with kids. When kids say rude things, so my prime example is the one you used, which is what's wrong with her.
Yes. And
so tell me how you handle that, Ellen.
Usually when a child is asking, I like that the kids are asking, and I like that I heard it, because then I get to tell them what's going on instead of a parent. And the first thing I say to them is, there's nothing wrong with her. She has a disability, and her disability is called, and depending on the child that I'm talking about, so her disability is called Down syndrome. Do you know what Down syndrome is? And most kids go, no, I don't. Or do you know what cerebral palsy? And most kids go, no, I don't. Well, would you like me to tell you about it? And kids, most of the time, I've never had a kid say no. So they want to learn about it. And I tell them in ways that it's easy to understand what it is. So I even had 2 of my Spanish students looking at a picture of Nicole, and they didn't say what's wrong with her, but I saw the puzzled look in their face, and I said she has Down syndrome, and they asked what it is. So I talked about chromosomes, and I said, you get 23 chromosomes from your mom, 23 chromosomes from your dad. Together, it's 46. And I said, she has 47 chromosomes. And both boys said, well, that's better. And I said, it is. You are right. And then I described how the extra chromosome, how that affects her body, as if it was creamer in coffee, that it doesn't sit at the very top. It just kind of swirls and kind of covers all of it. And that's what it does. It just kind of, it's all over her body. And, it affects everything in her body. And we talked about speech and stuff like that. So I tend to be excited when I share with kids, because if I'm excited and I present it in a positive way, it tends to be that what we portray and what we show is what people remember. So if I talked about it as if it was something bad, like they think it is, or negative, that's what they remember. But when I'm smiling and I'm talking about it with Nina, I get to say, some doctors thought that she would never be able to walk independently. And look at her. She can do it. Isn't that so exciting? And kids tend to pick up on that, and they say, yeah, that's really cool. So my favorite are kids. But what do you do, Erin?
Well, the only thing I would add to that, because that's exactly what I do, is when able, I let the child advocate for herself. So Anya cannot, but Oksana knows how to explain cerebral palsy at a level that she can understand. And I encourage the kids to come talk to Oksana and let Oksana tell them about her disability, because then it shows them that she's just like them.
And I would say Nina, my daughter who's 10 and has cerebral palsy, she is not there yet, and she feels very uncomfortable speaking up for herself. So at this point, she asks me to answer those questions. So even when people don't ask her questions, if she wants to say something about herself or her disability, she often deflects to me, and she will say, Mom, can you please tell them about whatever it is she wants me to say?
Yeah.
And at this point, I will keep doing that until she's ready. But I think you're right. The goal eventually is for our kids to be their own advocates, because that's the most powerful thing of all.
Yeah. Absolutely. I just thought of a situation. I had a kid once, Anya grinds her teeth and moans. And I had a kid say to me, can you make her stop that? She sounds like a cow. And that's one of those moments where as a parent, you want to go, and you're a brat.
Yes.
But I didn't. I explained Down syndrome.
Yes. I would have felt like
Okay.
saying that too.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So what if I'm a parent of a child who is staring or makes a rude comment about a person with a disability? How should I respond as a parent?
If we respond, this is how I feel. If I see a parent respond like it's a really big deal and they feel like, oh, no, 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 don't say that. That communicates that was a really bad thing to ask. And in a way, then it gets transferred onto disability. So I
Yes. Or
responded
grab
like it was,
hold
you
away.
just did, yes. I responded like you did something really bad. So that must be really bad. So disability is bad. Now, understanding that sometimes as parents, you do hear your kids say some really rude things. And I feel like there are two ways that you can go about it. One, you can explain and you can say, and it's okay to say, the way you said it might sound a little bit rude. So let me explain it to you if you feel comfortable as a parent and you actually know. And if you don't know, I think for me personally, it's totally acceptable to say, I'm really sorry. Would you like to explain that to my kid? Because I feel like you would do a much better job than I could. And to me, that's a really good answer. And I think about that not just in issues of disability, but issues of race, issues of anything
Sure.
that makes people uncomfortable. When you don't know something, you're going to have questions, and kids are so good at being curious. But I think for us as adults, if we don't actually have experience with what our kids are asking, if that person that they're asking about is present, I almost, for me personally, in issues of disability or issues of, let's say somebody wanted to know about being a Mexican, I would rather tell you and I would rather have you ask me so I can say something accurate as opposed to you as the other adult who maybe doesn't have a lot of experience try to explain something that's not your everyday life.
Right. Right. Another thing I think as a parent that's a good thing to do is go ahead and bring your child to meet the child. Say, that is a really cool wheelchair. We love the color pink,
Mm-hmm.
which Sana's wheelchair is so incredibly bright pink that you could see her a mile away.
Uh-huh.
But, or I love the shirt you have on. That's so cute. Just like you would any other child. And then you can start a conversation. And I'm like you, Ellen, I'm happy to talk about it and to help parents educate their children. I'm fine with it.
Mm-hmm. Now, understanding not all parents feel that way.
True.
And I think if it's your child saying something rude, watch the face of the other parent and how they react, because you might look at them and say, oh, they are not approachable at this moment.
Yes,
So
that's
don't go
true.
and initiate something that's going to feel very forced with someone that clearly doesn't want to talk to you. But I would say most of the time, and most parents I know are open to having those conversations.
Yes.
Now,
Yep.
how my kids will feel about their own disability when they grow up, they'll get to make those choices. They might not want people to ask them questions about their
True.
disability. For me as a parent, when people are asking, for now, I'm okay with that. If
Mm-hmm.
at some point Nina says, I don't want you to talk to them about me, then we're not talking about
That's right. That's right. And then you come up with a nice little phrase that you can kindly let that parent know that you're not in a position to talk about it right now.
it. Right.
Yeah. Okay. What about adults? Adults that say rude things.
So because we do hear the whole what's wrong with her from adults, my new standard response is I turn to Nina, because it's usually with Nina because she's in her wheelchair.
Right.
For some reason we hear that more than with Nicole, and maybe because with Nicole it's so obvious she has Down syndrome.
Yeah. Right.
And with Nina, my new response, I turn around and I go, oh no, what's wrong with her? What's wrong? And I start touching her. And I'm like, are you okay? Are you okay? What's wrong, sweetheart? What's wrong? What's wrong? And she goes, nothing. And I look at them and I say, what's wrong? And that immediately makes people go, oh, nothing. So that's,
I would think it might make them rephrase it. Oh, what I meant was,
no,
why
I
is
think
she in a
they feel a little bit
wheelchair?
embarrassed. I haven't had anybody rephrase now. I've only done that
Oh,
a couple of times. And I practiced it with Nina before we did it because
yeah.
she didn't like it. And she didn't, I think with that conversation, she didn't care for me to be explaining her CP to other
Uh-huh.
adults. And that's why
Right.
I said, we're going to start doing that.
Yeah.
It's really fun. A couple of times that it's happened.
I
That's
love it.
that's my one example.
Well, and again, it's back to, um, do we educate and unify, or do we separate and be rude about it? So my example of, oh, that's so sad. The man that said that to me, that's exactly what I said back to him. Oh, there's nothing sad about it. She actually has quite a wonderful life right now.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm trying to think, I haven't had a ton of adults say rude things to us. Can you think of another one?
You know, mostly what I've heard is that. Now I have had people ask, like I said before, did you know before? Um, did you know when you were pregnant
Right.
that she was going to have Down syndrome? And I don't even say, why do you ask? I just say, yes, we did know that there was a strong possibility and most likely she would. And then maybe I explained the reason we chose not to know for sure and have an amniocentesis is because of the risk to the baby.
Mm-hmm.
And that usually stops that conversation, for more questions. But I like to extend and say, she is the best thing that could have happened to us.
Right.
We
Right.
love her so much, and she's been such a blessing. So I try to bring that piece, that piece of the puzzle, bring it in, because I know people ask because you're curious, but also because there's the idea that disability is really hard and it's tragic. And in a way, thankfully it didn't happen to them sometimes.
Sure.
And sometimes it's just curiosity. And
Yeah.
especially when it comes to strangers, I think there's a line on why some people think it's okay to ask certain questions I
That's
will
true.
never understand. But those are the people that I want them to know our life is good and her life is good. And that's the whole piece of education. I think
Right.
with Nina, the whole what's wrong with you, it bothers her, and I know that it bothers her, and I try to be respectful, and it's something that she thought, well, that's kind of sounds good. I mean, I'm not turning around saying, oh my goodness, you're in a wheelchair, what happened,
Yeah.
because that
Right.
would make it even worse. It's just a way of responding to say, I'm looking at her and she's
And
fine.
I don't see anything wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think something I want to add here that you kind of started to bring up is, you don't owe it to anyone to answer their questions. You don't have to. There are going to be days that you are not in the mood to educate anyone about your or your child's disability, and that's perfectly okay.
Yes.
So let's touch a little bit on things that we can say when the conversation needs to stop, and it needs to stop immediately. If you don't have a snarky comeback, or you're not comfortable giving a snarky comeback, one of the things is you can say, thank you for your concern, and move on. The conversation is over.
Yes. Which is a good way of saying stop talking.
Yes.
And it's polite. You're not being rude.
Right, exactly. But it's making it clear that this conversation has ended. Can you think of another one?
No, because you had great ideas and I didn't write them down.
So you want me to just tell you
yes.
what the idea is? Silence.
That's right.
Don't respond back. And then, I respectfully disagree. Move on. So there are some little phrases like that that you can use when it is not appropriate to answer their rude question.
Yes. And I just want to point out that Erin really did come up with all of these, which is why, and I didn't write them down before. But those are great. So it's thank you for your concern. Silence is an answer, and
Silence is an answer.
I respectfully disagree.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Sounds good.
Anything else we need to touch on?
That's good. So for the freebie tonight, because we talked about this, what education looks like, and both Erin and I have done presentations at our kids' school, and that's a way of doing education towards kids. So the freebie is a swipe copy of an email that I send to my daughter's classmates and actually to the school, where I explain the presentation that we did. And then I have facts, for example, about Down syndrome. So it's a letter that I started. Now, Erin uses it when she does her presentations. So that is a letter that you can get. So that's the freebie. So you can read what it is. You can tweak it to be whatever you want. And before the letter, I will have the actual presentation I do for Down syndrome. And you can see how you can adapt it to other things. So if your child has cerebral palsy, you can see and try to get creative in things that you can do to help kids understand cerebral palsy or whatever disability that they have. Actually, there are so many great ideas for autism that can even be Googled. That if a child has autism, there's some very creative parents out there giving presentations. And then that's what I do. Then I write a letter to everybody explaining what it is, and there's some facts. So that's the swipe copy, which means it's an example. Use it as a guide if you want to use it. Use it if you feel like it would be useful. If your child has Down syndrome, it's ready for you. So that's the freebie this week.
And I would say that it can be used one of two ways. It could be used as an introductory letter to your child's class at the beginning of the school year, letting them know about your child that's in their child's class. The way I use it is I do a presentation in Anya's class every year and teach them about Down syndrome. And then the letter goes home with them. I print them and send it home with them to the parents saying, this is what we talked about today. I got to come to class. This is what we talked about. This is who my daughter is. These are the things we discussed. You can ask me if you have any questions. And then on the back is the facts that you have, that you will post, that you have listed.
And that's actually what people will get in the freebie. I'm going to have the presentation and the letter that does mention the presentation.
And this is a proactive way to avoid some of the rude comments, right? If we can educate the children in our kids' classes about disability, then we're being proactive when they see other children in the community who have disabilities.
And it turns out to be a great learning experience. I think about at our school, I intended to do it just with my daughter's classroom, and the principal loved it so much that she asked for me to do it for the entire school.
Yeah.
So this is something that it can start with the class, but eventually it could open the doors for doing it for the entire school and maybe for other schools. So now, not every parent has the time, but for those that are able to, it's such a great way to teach and educate. And I feel like then that letter goes home, and through the letter, we're doing parent education as well.
Absolutely.
And I invite parents to ask me questions. I include my email, and I would say every year I get at least one email back from parents. And sometimes it's just,
I have yet to.
You have yet to. I do. I get at least one every year. Now, your school is a lot bigger than our school. So at our school, we know a lot more, the parents a lot more. And sometimes it's just, hey, thanks for doing this. Thanks for the letter. I learned something. That's it. So that's really nice to have. And for me, I've heard back from other parents that have kids with disabilities, and I actually didn't know that their child had a disability, because it's one of those invisible disabilities, So then they're opening up and sharing with me. And then I have connection with other special needs parents, which is really sweet. But so we can educate the kids, and then we can also educate the parents through the letter.
Absolutely.
And then hopefully next time, if one of their other kids ever says something about someone with a disability, they will have a little bit of background and education in ways that they can answer as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that's it. So we loved having this topic from Amy, and we hope that people send us more ideas about topics because we want to talk about what people want to hear about.
Absolutely. And please let us know in the comments, do you have a phrase that you use when people say rude things? How do you feel about educating people? You might do it just like we do it, and we'd love to hear from you.
Absolutely. So I would say until next week, have a good one.
Bye.